Death usually ends a story, especially a public death. Humiliating, brutal, final. The kind Rome perfected with cold precision. After a crucifixion, there is no sequel, no second act, no unexpected twist. Yet in the days following the death of Jesus of Nazareth, something happened that defied the quiet certainty of endings, something that sent shockwaves through the back streets of Jerusalem. Not a proclamation from Rome, not a rebellion from zealots, but whispers, uncertain, confused, breathless whispers. The 12, those men who followed him for years, were nowhere to be seen. Once confident voices, now silent. Once bold faces, now hidden behind shutters. They had scattered into the shadows, clinging to terror like a cloak, wondering what would become of them now that the teacher was gone. Their world had collapsed. Their faith had ruptured. And the movement they believed would transform Israel had ended on a Roman cross. But the story of these 12 men does not fade into obscurity after the crucifixion. Their lives did not dissolve into grief. Instead, they became the unlikely architects of something that would outlast empires. Their footsteps traced continents. Their voices shifted cultures. Their courage birthed communities in places they had never known existed. And their deaths, often violent, often lonely, became the final signatures of lives transformed. But to understand how these ordinary men became legends, we must begin in the hours immediately after the crucifixion, when everything appeared lost. The city was still buzzing with Passover crowds. The temple courts echoed with chants, merchants, prayers, and the metallic clatter of Roman armor. Yet somewhere behind a locked door, 11 men huddled in fear. Peter, who had once sworn he would die for Jesus, now relived the sound of a rooster echoing through the dark as he denied his teacher 3 times. John, the youngest, could still feel the weight of Mary leaning on him as they watched Jesus take his final breath. Thomas was missing altogether, perhaps wandering the outskirts of the city, crushed by doubt and despair. Matthew, once a collector of coins, held nothing but regret. And James, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Simon, and Thaddeus whispered in stunned confusion. Then came a knock, not on their door, but on the unstable certainty of their grief. Mary Magdalene, breathless, shaking, burst into the hiding place with an impossible claim. The tomb was empty. Her voice trembled as she insisted she had seen him alive. Not a vision, not a dream, alive. The men dismissed it as grief, a trick of exhaustion. Yet Peter and John ran to the tomb only to find it just as she had said, empty, silent, and strangely ordered, as if someone didn't steal a body but left the grave behind. That evening, behind locked doors, a presence they knew and feared and loved suddenly stood among them. Peace be with you. Words they had heard before, words from a voice they recognized, and everything, fear, doubt, grief, shifted. This was the moment the 12 changed, not instantly, not with perfection, but undeniably. Something ignited that night, something that would burn across deserts and mountains, across seas and kingdoms, carried on the voices of men who once trembled at the knock of a Roman guard. In the weeks following, the apostles remained in Jerusalem, bewildered eyes adjusting to a world where death no longer meant what it once did. They listened, they learned, they broke bread together, and then, one day, he was gone, ascending beyond their sight with a final command to carry his message to the ends of the earth. The 12 were about to step into a world far larger, far stranger, and far more dangerous than the roads of Galilee. It began with Peter, the man who once sank in the waves, who once denied his teacher with curses, now stood before crowds in Jerusalem, speaking with a fire no one had ever heard from him. Fishermen and priests, merchants and travelers, it didn't matter who he spoke to. His voice cut through the noise of the city with a conviction shaped by failure and redemption. Thousands answered. A community began to grow, and with growth overcame opposition. Peter and John were arrested, threatened, imprisoned. Yet something in their untrained, unpolished speech unsettled the council of elders. These men had stood broken days earlier. Now they stood unafraid. And fearlessness, especially among the ordinary, is always dangerous to the powerful. But the early movement did not stay in Jerusalem forever. Persecution soon scattered the followers of Jesus, pushing them into neighboring regions. And the apostles, those who once could barely withstand the pressure of a few questions in a courtyard, now stepped onto the world stage. Their journeys became the threads that wove the earliest tapestry of Christianity. Thomas, the apostle of doubt, became the apostle of distance. While he initially refused to believe in the resurrection until he saw and touched the wounds himself, his skepticism transformed into a faith so unwavering it carried him farther than almost any of the others. He traveled through Syria, crossed the trade routes of Persia, and continued his journey to the coast of India. There, in a land of temples, spices, and ancient traditions, he preached a message that took root unexpectedly. Communities that trace their origins to him still exist today, calling themselves the Church of St. Thomas. His death, according to tradition, came by the thrust of a spear, a bitter irony for a man who once demanded to touch the wounds of another. Andrew, Peter's brother, traveled northward into regions shaped by Greek philosophy and Roman law. His path wound around the Black Sea, into lands inhabited by nomadic tribes and Hellenistic settlers. He is said to have faced execution in Patras, tied to an X-shaped cross, deliberately stretched out so that his suffering would be prolonged. Even as he hung there, he spoke to crowds, urging them not toward rebellion, but toward hope. The image of Andrew on his cross became one of the most enduring symbols of Christian martyrdom. James the Greater, bold and passionate, met his end closer to home. He became the first of the 12 to be executed after the resurrection, killed by the sword under the orders of King Herod Agrippa. But his story grew long after his death. Medieval tradition claimed his relics were carried to the western edge of Europe, where the shrine of Santiago de Compostela would draw pilgrims across continents. Whether true or embellished, the tradition speaks to the power of his memory. John, his brother, traveled a different road. Some traditions say he was arrested, burned in oil, and survived. Others place him in Ephesus, guiding early Christians with gentleness and wisdom. Exiled to the island of Patmos, he is said to have received visions that would later become part of the New Testament. Unlike the others, John is remembered as the only apostle to die of old age, carrying the memories of the others with him into a peaceful passing. Philip journeyed through Asia Minor, confronting philosophies and rulers with a measured, thoughtful conviction. He was executed in Hierapolis, according to early sources, after converting the wife of a Roman official, a conversion that sparked violent retaliation. Bartholomew traveled to Armenia and possibly beyond, with some traditions linking him to India alongside Thomas. His death, described with disturbing detail in some accounts, marks him as one of the most brutally martyred of the 12. Matthew, the tax collector turned teacher, carried the message to lands as far as Ethiopia and Persia. The gospel associated with his name became a foundational text for early Christians. Thaddeus, also known as Jude, traveled through Syria and Persia. One ancient king, afflicted by illness, is said to have been healed by him, sparking a wave of early conversions. Simon the Zealot, once possibly a revolutionary, turned his passion toward peace, traveling through North Africa and into Persia, where he met martyrdom. James the Less remained a pillar of the Jerusalem community. His reputation for righteousness was so great that even those outside the movement revered him. His death came violently, thrown from the temple and stoned. Even Matthias, chosen to replace Judas, stepped into a life of mission. His journeys likely carried him into Cappadocia and Ethiopia, where he lived and died far from the land he once called home. But if the 12 carried the message outward, one unexpected figure connected their stories together: Paul. Not one of the original disciples, not even a supporter. Yet his encounter on the Damascus Road transformed him into a force that reshaped the ancient world. He carried the message into the intellectual heart of Greece, the political machinery of Rome, and the diverse regions of Asia Minor. Along the way, he worked with the apostles, debated them, wrote to their communities, and helped preserve their teachings. As decades passed, the 12 were slowly taken by age, by persecution, or by the dangers of travel. But the communities they founded flourished. Their words, once spoken in dusty synagogues and along bustling trade routes, were preserved, translated, debated, cherished. Their courage inspired generations. What makes their story remarkable is not simply that they traveled or preached or died for their beliefs. It is that they began as ordinary men, fishermen, a tax collector, a zealot with political rage burning inside him, a skeptic who demanded proof, a young man with more questions than answers, men who failed, doubted, misunderstood, and sometimes fled, men who were never trained for leadership, diplomacy, or crossing cultural boundaries. And yet, within a few decades, their message had spread across the Mediterranean world. They reshaped history not through conquest or wealth or political power, but through conviction. Through the belief that something had happened after the crucifixion, something so profound it transformed fear into courage, grief into purpose, and ordinary lives into legends. The 12 disciples after the crucifixion did not fade into silence. They became the voices that echoed across continents, the footsteps that crossed mountains and deserts, the spark that ignited one of the most influential movements in human history. They began as men who ran from danger. They became men who walked into it willingly. And their story, fragile, courageous, extraordinary, remains one of the most compelling chapters in all of history.